Really a conversation because we are in the open field, right? When you're in the big sea, we want to fight our course, and we'll do it together. So without further ado, so I'm Alexy Khrabrov. I'm one of the co-organizers of this. I run the Bay Area Meetup and Scale by the Bay conference for 10 years in the Bay Area. And the 10th one is in November. It will be like this, but 10 times bigger. So please join us in November. The CFP is still open a few days more until end of June. And I also run open source science program at IBM Research and meet my colleagues at the open source science sign. That was Paige talking about. Join us. It's a volunteer effort to accelerate science with open source. So we welcome everyone. And now I'll let everybody introduce themselves, left to right, starting off Ofer.
Hi everyone, I'm Ofer Mendelevitch. I run developer relations for Vectara. And kind of a way of introduction, I had the opportunity to work on LLM since it was GPT-2 about 4 years ago. So it's really interesting to see how it progressed over the last 4 years, and kind of was very impressed with its capabilities and seeing how, but also some of its challenges. And so I've joined Vectara. We do a platform to develop generative AI applications. Kind of seeing the potential, it was a no-brainer for me to join the company, and happy to have a lively conversation with everybody here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Christopher Nguyen. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Aitomatic, and we work on industrial AI, and LLMs are at the heart of that. And the reason that we discovered, or the need for that, was my previous company was acquired by Panasonic, which, as many of you may know, is now a global industrial company. And that was a startup that I started a number of years ago, many years ago. In fact, I was one of the earliest committers to Spark. It was a machine learning company, and my job at Panasonic, I ran global industrial AI, and we failed, right, very quickly. And I realized that what we knew of as digital AI or digital machine learning that we do in Silicon Valley actually doesn't really work for the physical world. I'll be talking about that at a later talk, but obviously the work that I do at Panasonic, there's a lot of dependency on safety, reliability, and so on, right? Avionics, automotive, and so on. So I've had a long career here, but this is a really exciting times. I like to tell my team that this is not even a once in a generation kind of technology disruption, probably once in a millennia. So looking forward to talking about that.
Hi, my name is Sandeep Gopisetty. I work for IBM Research. My career started with handwriting recognition, right? And I used to work very closely with the media, with images, with speech. And since then, the world's changed quite a bit, right? In terms of the use and the adoption of AI. With the introduction of ChatGPT and the GPT models in particular, it's been everything for everyone all at once. So the key challenge now is that how do we trust it, right? And hopefully we'll get to delve a little bit more into it today. And my new role is really about data and data management and the use of data for enterprises. So my focus is purely in providing better AI solutions for enterprises.
Hey everyone, my name is Josh Tobin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gantry. We provide infrastructure and sort of workflow-oriented tools to help companies with all of the stuff that happens after you deploy a model. So really focused on maintaining and continually improving models in production. And one of the key questions that our customers always have there is, hey, how do we make sure that these models that we're developing or that we're trying to improve are actually trustworthy and they're actually safe? So super excited about the topic today. I also co-organize a course called Full Stack Deep Learning, where we were sort of one of the first classes to teach folks about all the stuff that you need to do to make models work as part of products other than training them, which turns out is, sadly for myself as a former machine learning researcher, not the most important part. And previously I was a research scientist at OpenAI.
Hi everyone, my name is Chengyin Eng. I'm a senior data science consultant at Databricks. I help customers implement scalable machine learning systems. My journey in LLM started when I was in grad school when Sesame characters were all the rage, all the BERT and then all the Elmo models. And I'm also one of the co-instructor for the edX course for large language models in production.
Thank you everybody for your introduction. Just maybe we can give a mic to Chengyin for now, right, and then give it to the audience. So everybody has a mic. Thank you. All right, so trust, right? This is a big topic. I think this is the key and crucial topic in the whole area right now. And a lot of you are actually experienced, I think, some of the most experienced people in the world right now, because the whole thing started, right, a few months ago. And so, and obviously we can come at this from different angles. I'll ask you to very quickly say, what is your definition of trust? Everybody. Define trust in like the shortest way possible. And maybe link it to your topic, to what you do.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So for me, trust in the context of LLMs is a couple things. One is I want to trust that the model is going to give me the right answer, right? So we know about this for a long time. There's this, sorry, not a long time, 6 months. But there's hallucinations. That's a big problem, right? And other things like that. So give me the right answer. Trust is also kind of another angle I think about is privacy of my data. How can I trust that the data I use when asking questions or when using my own data with large language models is not leaking? There was a big thing about that. And so that's the other angle I'm thinking about.
All right. So the way I think of it is actually I asked the question, why are we talking about it, right? On the one hand, if you think about the kind of work that companies like Panasonic does, it's over 100 years old. It built, for example, it makes all the batteries for Tesla, at least the ones that are outside of China. It deals with avionics, automotive, refrigeration systems. So clearly trust, reliability is really an inherent part of their product process. In fact, there's an organization, large organization in a company like that. In the case of Panasonic, it's called Product Security Center, and it deals with all of these issues. So in that sense, it's always been inherent. But on the other hand, to a lot of us in Silicon Valley, we've been, I launched Gmail at Google, and the word trust at least never explicitly came up as a major concern. So I think the reason trust comes to the fore is both a technological phenomenon, but also a sociological phenomenon. As far as when I use the term Silicon Valley, it's sort of a proxy for all of us here, right? Wherever we are. It's a new phenomenon to us where, for the first time, we are building machines that are actually, they seem to be in the position of telling us what to do as opposed to be the other way around. And I think, when you think about trust in terms of trusting AI, there's a lot of concern about hallucination. Why do we care? We care because we're saying, hey, can we really listen to these machines, right? So I think in that sense, it is indeed sort of a new thing. But I think we can draw a lot of lessons from companies like Panasonic, IBM, Apple, and so on in terms, when we think about AI trust.
I think both Ofer and Chris talked about hallucinations. I'll try and not touch that. So when we're talking about AI systems, can be trusted not to be abusive, right? Can be trusted not to be profane? Can be trusted not to have hate in it, right? In this day and age when pretty much, profanity, hate, and abuse has been normalized in the society, how do we get machine learning systems not to be abusive, right? How do we eliminate any of these things? How can we trust it not to, be profane and abusive to the users? The other thing when we talk about trust is, personal information, especially if it can be identifiable to a particular person, right? Going beyond the Wikipedias of the world or the papers or the publications that are typically there. How do we trust AI systems to not make up stuff, right? And a significant part of that is being able to teach a large language model about personally identifiable information and then understand what is objectionable in it, right? And the significant amount of the problems when we're talking about large language models comes from the fact that there is redundancy in the way people interpret data, and how do we eliminate that in particular, right? And in the good old days, if there was ever a doubt about a particular pattern and the label associated with it, you try to get more people to label it, right? In this day and age, when we're dealing with petabytes of data, how do we really get people to rely on that particular data in a more trustworthy form? for me, trust comes in different forms, not just in the, in the output of the LLM, but also being able to address the output of the LLM and all the way to the data.
I think for those of us in Silicon Valley, it's we have a tendency to get overexcited about new technologies, and LLMs are maybe an extreme example of that. And the reason why people are so excited about them is because of the obvious capability that this technology has. But at the end of the day, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when people look back on this technology, they're not going to judge it based on how capable it was. They're going to judge it based on the impact that it ended up having on the world. And so what's going to lead to this technology being successful or not is how widely and how quickly it's adopted in actual applications that solve real problems for people in the world. And so trust is the ability for the people that are involved in building, deploying, and using these applications that are powered by language models. It's the ability for them to take something that is capable of solving their problem and actually let it solve their problem. And so the main thing that's, I think, really holding back LLMs is consistent with what's been holding back machine learning as a field for at least the past 10 years, which is that this is a technology that inherently always makes mistakes, right? Like when we build software, there's bugs in software, and we're kind of used to that, but people see bugs as these sort of rare things, these sort of artifacts of our imperfection as humans in developing this application, but something that we can strive to not have. Machine learning is inherently a probabilistic technology. Machine learning models will always make mistakes. And so whether it's hallucinations that everyone's talking about today or some future problem that people have downstream of that, there's always going to be failures of these types of models, at least until we get well past AGI. And so the real, I think, key to addressing the trust gap is, in my mind, there's sort of two pieces to it. One is user experience, which is kind of the user-facing side of the trust equation. And then the other is measurement, which is the sort of developer and deployer facing side of the trust equation. So those, I think, are going to be the keys.
And as a hands-on implementation consultant, the top question that I get asked often is, how do I make sure that this model can be reproducible in a production system? And I think that's something that's really surprising about LLMs today, even for ChatGPT. Like, say if you were to pass in exactly the same sentiment and ask ChatGPT to classify, if the sentiment is positive or negative, or give it a rating from 0 to 10, we might get a very different response. Like maybe for the same response, for the same prompt, we get 7.5 versus a 9, sometimes even a 5. So to me, that's really surprising that we are putting trust in this type of systems, in this type of LLMs, where we cannot even guarantee consistency in the output. So even aside from hallucination, I think there is also a big gap in how can we trust these systems when we cannot even be sure that given the same input, the output can be different.
Thank you. So this is, I think, a very comprehensive, ideas of trust. But I know that each of you is building something and addressing it in reality. So can you tell in a few words what part of what you are building is really resonating with customers, right? What do people see from what you are telling them, from what they see, which they really like and feel like this is increasing trust? In a few words, everybody. In any order. Maybe from that end, actually.
Let me go first. And
Change the order.
yeah, exactly.
Just switch it up, make it more random, like a large language model.
Yeah.
Okay, Sandeep.
So a lot of the problems that we're really dealing with today has to do with the fact that there's just different types of labeling on the data itself, right? And we're also expecting the LLMs to actually understand reasoning, right? And to try and define reasoning into a large language model is a very difficult problem, right? I mean, reasoning is not something that you learn from massive amounts of text. I mean, that's the mathematical logic that goes behind it is very, very different. So when we're talking about consistency in results, most of the problem with the consistency of the results has to do with the fact that different people have different opinions about the same sentiment, right? And it may mean very different for the guys on the right versus the guys on the left, right? In a very abstract way. When you have people who are very polarized, you're bound to teach LLMs to be very polarized as well. And that makes it very, very difficult to actually get to one single answer at any given time, right?
The one of the challenging things about trust is it's a long tail lagging indicator. If you think about how to measure trust, right? So a lot of companies that we talk to are having this experience of, hey, we got access to ChatGPT or GPT-4, we built this product feature, we shipped it, it took us like 3 or 4 weeks, our users loved it, meaningfully moved the metrics for us, and now they're trying to figure out like, okay, we had this sort of one-time spike in usage, but is this truly solving a problem for our users? Is this something that is going to cause us to retain more users, to grow our user base over time? And one of the challenges with that is that like a lot of people are using these tools now because they're shiny. People are using, like everyone wants to use the latest AI tools. But I think what's beneath the surface is that there's a sort of looming wave of churn for a lot of these tools because at the end of the day, you might love your question answering search tool, not to pick on any of those companies because I think they're great, but if you use one of those things and 8 times out of 10 it gives you an answer that you can't rely on, or you have to go check your work with Google, it's not going to become ingrained in your behavior, right? So you'll use it a lot at first because it feels better, but if you don't trust it, you're not going to stick with the tool. And so I think the key to trust is, again, comes back to can you measure, is there a way for you to measure what is causing users to stick with this thing or not? So the thing that we're building that's really resonating with companies that are building tools like this is building evaluations of models that are tied to things that happen in the end user experience. So if you see end users submitting particular types of inputs and then churning, or being less likely to come back, then you want to make that part of your evaluation suite so that you can measure progress against whether you're improving your model's capabilities on those types of tasks.
I think the silver lining behind sort of the hype, or justify or not, behind LLMs is really that we as a community have come to realize how limited the traditional evaluation metrics are. We like to rely on benchmark competitions. We like to say, oh, this is the top model in this leaderboard. But then now we are quickly realizing, because based on the really accessible output, that, hey, this is actually really subjective. Who are you to say that this is the top response versus the last response? So I think we're starting to finally get the subjective nuances in what large language model can output, even though language models have been around for a really long time.
So so for us at Vectara, one of the things that we tackle, of course, is hallucination. That's why I speak about it. But I think it's interesting. What we do is we call it grounded generation, which is a form of retrieval augmented generation. It's a particular type of application that's pretty broad. And how it works is you help the LLM gain other facts using your own data, for example, using a very strong retrieval engine. So think about it as if you give the LLM facts and you emphasize those facts and you say, please respond based on these facts, it gives a higher chance of not hallucinating and actually knowing what to base the facts on. And of course, you get a response and you get the citations you can check, but it definitely reduces hallucination significantly. That's why our customers like it and feel confident it's an improvement on kind of just using the LLM purely. I think the other thing that we find a lot of interest from our customers is the fact that because we only do that, we don't need to, and therefore can promise them we're never going to kind of use their data for training. We train our retrieval engine, which is different, and we train it on only public information. So that gives people a lot of confidence as well.
I'll talk about Alexy's question was, what are your customers excited about or interested about when it comes to what you do and as it relates to trust? I'll try to answer that question by asking the audience a couple of questions, and then we'll walk through it. One is, of course, I think you all know Stanford HAI does this annual survey of the state of AI, and this year they published something. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see the answer to this question. So they published a survey done by someone else. Essentially, the optimism around AI as technology across different countries. So I was curious, and I took that and I plotted against GDP per capita, right? And so the correlation is extremely strong. The R squared is 67%. Okay, so clearly there's a correlation. But I want to ask you, to guess, like, there's two polarities, right? One is richer countries are more optimistic, or poorer countries, or A, and B is poorer countries, emerging economies and so on, are more optimistic in their response to AI optimism. How many people think it's A? How many people think it's B? Yeah, you're so smart. It certainly surprised me, because the same data, when asked about technology optimism, it's exactly the opposite. So there's something there. We don't know what the cause is. The second thing is, in my work, I deal a lot with sort of the CXO level, and then also at the governmental level and so on. And because I do industrial AI, it turns out a lot of my customers are not in the US. We have some in the US, but a lot in Asia and Europe and so on, where they're still making things, right? Well, we're trying to bring that back, with Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act and so on. But let me ask you, and this is kind of a loaded question, and I'm sorry if you work for some of the companies that I mentioned, but when it comes to LLMs, what degree of trust do you think these companies and these countries have for sort of basing the foundation models on OpenAI or on Microsoft? You think it's, let's say it's high versus very low. How many people think it's high? Low. Yeah, it is very low. And it's not, it has become a geopolitical, Japan has declared it to be a national security issue, not to be dependent on someone else's foundation models. So I mentioned earlier, there's an interesting moment here. The PESTEL analysis is not just technological. There's a bunch of other letters: political, economic, social, environmental, and so on, legal. But it's a really interesting moment where countries and certainly companies say, we don't want, we want our own models, right? So what we do at Aitomatic, we actually do something called SSM, right? You can guess it's sort of the opposite of LLM. We call them small specialist models. And these are domain expert duplicates, right? And they collaborate in teams to solve very specific problems. And of course, the front end is natural language, but you don't need all of the, a compressor expert doesn't need to know who the president of the United States was in 1875. So based on that, we can have models that are 1,000 times smaller and 1,000 times faster, but also that are fully owned by the customers. And so that's what they're excited about. They're excited about independence.
Thank you. I think this is a very comprehensive view of different aspects of trust. I think we have about 5 minutes for us, and I'd like to leave 10 minutes to the audience. So you guys can prepare your questions. So in these 5 minutes, I want to kind of invert the typical panel dynamics where you talk about your stuff. So you heard about other people's stuff, right? And we're in the open source world. This is a community meetup. So given what you heard from others, right, I think everybody represents a company which is in business. And so there is this term which I learned when I worked with Bosch, which is an industrial intelligence company, as Chris describes. So they invented some competition, right? Because it's a competition and cooperation, because all these industrial devices need to be working with each other. And obviously, lots of pieces of software we use comprise a stack, and in open source, we actually explicitly use it. So given what you heard, given where you are in the stack, what would you like others to do to work with you better? If you can think of something, and
I can talk about Ofer right away. I'm very excited about what Vectara does, right? Because as you can imagine, what we do is one level above that. We definitely use retrieval augmented, essentially inferences, right? And so it turns out, again, once you think about the paradigm of SSM, small specialist models versus LLM, you don't really care about a lot of the intelligence in the language model itself. In fact, the language model is really, to us, just a communication layer. So sometimes I say I'm excited about this revolution in terms of communication more so than in terms of intelligence. The intelligence can be provided by what Vectara does, which is backed by, maybe RDBMS, maybe PDS files, and so on, domain-specific knowledge that can somehow be mixed together by a very thin layer of sort of a natural language translator.
Well, I should then do the opposite for you, because I'm actually, but I mean, people, you mentioned that SSM versus LLM. So when I say LLM, I just mean language models. And it's a true point, right? Like, we don't need it to be large. They became large of necessity of, they need to be more accurate. So if you looked 2 years ago, you'd see like there's all these graphs of like how many model parameters you have. And, it reminded me of the old search days when Google and Yahoo and Microsoft thought of how many pages they had in their index, right? So I think we're finding out in the research now that, maybe they'll be larger, or maybe not. There's other techniques that are being held. So I think we're agnostic to which language model we use underneath, and SSMs could be another option for that as well. So I'm excited that you're creating these specialized ones with your customers. And I think, again, they don't need to be large. They need to be, like you said, accurate. And we will add the custom data to them in whatever form they come. So
I work in IBM Research, so I'm going to give a research spin to this one. Right? In the good old days, I mean, we had specification languages, and most of the money was in the programmers who understood specification languages and programmed the systems to perform in a certain way, to basically optimize whatever task that they were doing. So now with large language models, it's kind of flipped. So what we really need are verification languages, right? So we need to have verification models. How do we trust something that's coming out of a large language model? How do you verify it? And how do you really, propagate that? Doesn't matter, which industry you're applying to, whether the problem is large or small. I see a big need of investment on the verification phase.
To piggyback on that, I think we need to think beyond just a large language model. We need to think about a system that has a large language model. So today I just finished teaching day one of the Data AI Summit course on large language models. And a lot of questions were about, how do I make sure there's no prompt hacking? How do I make sure that there's proper rate limiting? How do I make sure there's no user abuse? And all these questions have to come around like the infrastructure that supports the single LLM. And it's very possible that you need more than one model, that could be an LLM or not, to make this LLM actually usable and trustworthy in a production system. Maybe you need to have some processing, post-processing system afterwards to correct your response before it even gets shown to the user. So I think we need to, just like how in ML, in a machine learning context, we think about machine learning model, but I think we have fast forwarded, to today, we are finally talking about ML ops, thinking about it as a system. And I think we also need to do the same thing for LLMs as well.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on the comments on evaluation models or verification models, since that's something that we're working on as well. I think one of the keys is going to be, okay, so why do we need these things? We need these things because telling whether an LLM got the answer right is difficult. Like, we don't have good quantitative ways to say this summarization of this document is better than that summarization, or this generated marketing email is better than this other generated marketing email. So we need intelligent systems to help us verify whether the things that we're producing as a result of these models are correct, or at least trending in the right direction. And so the challenge that presents is, if you have LLMs evaluating other LLMs, you might be asking yourself, well, who's watching the watchman, right? Like, how do we know that these evaluation models are actually doing the right thing or not? And the answer to that is that at the end of the day, there's a certain property of this generated text that we really care about. Maybe it's how much do humans like it, or how much do humans click on it, or how much does it solve their problem. And so I think the way that we all can contribute to moving this process forward is to think of part of our role as helping build and verify the validation and evaluation models, right? So the role that humans play in this is, we are helping the developers of these systems gain confidence that their automated evaluation corresponds with the thing that we as humans really care about. So, give your friendly ChatGPT a thumbs up or a thumbs down today, and help progress of AI moving forward.
Thank you. This sounds like a great program. So for now, I want one of the guys to give up the mic to the audience. If one of the guys can volunteer. You know, I think Chengyin can keep yours. I mean, yeah, you keep yours. We have 4 guys. One of them can give a mic, I think. All right, thank you. And now, please ask a question. Jasmine will bring the mic to you. The question is in the front row. And we have about 5 minutes, so please be quick.
Hi. So when you discussed about the trust, my name is Lalit Verma, by the way. So when you discussed about the trust, I was hoping to hear something more from the, so there are 2 aspects. One is the training side, and one is basically the verification side, which you talked about. I believe human in the loop is still the answer. But in training side, because some of the models are open source, some of the models are proprietary, how do you, and something is evaluated by NLU, not NLP alone, right? So it's natural understanding. What's your take on basically the fact that the models are so arcane, so proprietary kind of thing, that kind of does not inspire the trust?
Yeah, Lalit, there are 2 parts to it, right? So one is that since most of these large language models are built on top of openly available data, and they're continuing to learn from a lot of these data as you go from 1 trillion tokens to 2 trillion to 5 trillion tokens. There is no way of actually preventing poisoning of language models, right? So that's in the training phase. The second part of it is that if you're fine-tuning any of the large language models, that's another place where potentially people could poison the language models themselves. When we're dealing with open source models, right, and from an enterprise point of view or from an end user point of view, you want to start building in some of these capabilities post the inference, right? Once it's inferenced and you have some of the answers, you want to run through potentially analytics that will help reduce or eliminate bias, eliminate some of the standard problems that you see with hallucinations, problems with hate, abuse of profanity, or PII, right? Any of this stuff. So you can start adding those modules rather than just accepting a large language model as is, as your final solution, right? So it's going to be challenging in terms of how enterprise systems are going to be built and how they're going to be used in the marketplace. But that's where I see as the next big thing.
Let's have another question for the audience, and then another panelist can answer, please.
So since for trust, since the data privacy is important and how you collect and train the data to create the model is important. So have you considered, what do you think about the federal learning to train the model without moving the data, keep the data private?
I'm going to quickly answer that one, and I'll pass it on to one of these people, right? So when we're talking about federated learning, again, it depends upon if you're trying to create an SSM, or if you're trying to take an LLM and then customize it for the end user, right? Typically in a federated learning model, you're limited to the amount of data that you can actually get from that one. So you could potentially use federated learning for fine-tuning an application, right? Not necessarily in creating a large language model itself, unless your bandwidth and your compute and the amount of data that you have really exceeds the current limitations that we see.
There's a company called LoRa Cyber that does secure machine learning, and they use homomorphic encryption. Of course, they've worked a lot on the efficiency of it, so that it's not like 1,000 times slower. So you can look at technologies like that. On the other hand, there's also, again, I talk about there's legislation in Europe that says for you to put a model into production, you must publish the data that went into the creation of it. So of course that's for public consumption and so on. So I think there's a tension between what technologies you want to use, to say solve these privacy or security problems, versus what the concerns of societies are in terms of where these models go. I think the answer is going to be a collection of these things, not any single one. I think you earlier mentioned that we should be thinking about this as a systems problem rather than just a model problem, right? The stuff that goes into it, how it makes these decisions, and the model interacting with other models, in a problem-solving loop, and the output of that. I come back to my comment earlier. There's an entire industry that has been dealing with reliability, trust, safety issues for a very long time. I think we can draw a lot of lessons. It's just that our internet, if you will, companies have not been organized that way, and now we're talking about this and say, okay, we need to put that organization in place. And if you look at the 2020 election, Facebook, Google, and so on have had to put some of these organizations in place to sort of, try to combat essentially distrust. So I think for companies to think about these issues at this time, I think that's a good thing, and it's going to be a collection of both technological as well as various other factors that need to be brought to bear.
I think we really have only 2 minutes left. So if anybody can summarize what we should do next in literally 30 seconds, that will be a good closing to us. So your directive for all of us in 30 seconds, what we should do next.
Well, for me, I think, I talk a lot about hallucination. I actually believe that this will get solved in a couple of different ways. One of them will be retrieval augmented generation, but I think if we think about GPT-5 or the equivalent in any other company, I think it'll get better. There's a lot of research that happens in that space. I think I'm also interested to see how the regulation around the world will happen and what will it demand in terms of that. And especially, I always mentioned open source models earlier. I'm really excited about open source model. I think I used to work at Hortonworks, which is an open source software company, and now seeing that happen in a space of larger models is very exciting. I think it'll have a lot of benefit for everyone.
Thank you, Ofer. Chris, and 30 seconds.
We're open sourcing SSM. If you come to my talk, I'll announce that there.
Thank you. Sandeep.
So from my perspective, at least, how long is it going to be before we start using generated data to start training large language models? This is potentially going to be a big problem. So identification of what is generated content would significantly help in advancing the state of large language models.
If you're building a product that's powered by large language models, then think really carefully about the user experience that you can create that helps your users deal with the fact that your model is going to get things wrong. And there's not a technology fix that's going to save us from that. It's going to improve things, but it's not going to eliminate them. And then second, if you're building applications with these things, then think really carefully about measurement. Just be like, even if someone gives you access to all the data that GPT-4 was trained on, that is not going to help you trust GPT-4 anymore, because that is way more data than you're going to be able to do anything interesting with. Like think about like trying to understand all the data on the internet. The key for these things is going to be developing benchmarks that intelligently surface like aggregate level insights about the model's performance on this massive amounts of data. And that's something that closed source companies are going to be able to do just as well as open source ones.
I would say there are 2 things. First, don't underestimate the power of your data. So make sure you actually address that early on, because we have seen the data problem trickling through the age of machine learning till now, and today we're still talking about quality of data. And the second thing is, discuss with your friends and even non-machine learning friends too, about ChatGPT and the consequences. I think the more people know about consequences of LLMs and what risks or limitations they have, then the more power we have as grassroots community, to demand actually audits of models before they actually get released to the public for use.
Thank you, everybody. That was a great panel. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists. All right.